Before we get started with this episode, I wanted to give you some exciting news that the first Wednesday of every month, there will be an introductory session presented by me for the Creighton model system, which is a system of fertility charting. This introductory session, you will leave knowing the basics of knowing how to chart your cycle, and you will learn so much about your reproductive anatomy, hormones, physiology, all the things. So many times I give this presentation to women and to couples, and they always say, why have I never known this information before? So if you are interested in signing up for this introductory session, it is just $50 to get started with this session. From there, we'll do some one-on-one coaching, get you really locked and loaded with knowing how to chart your cycle and becoming so much more empowered from there. Visit truthandfertility.com to sign up. Welcome to the Truth and Fertility Podcast. I'm Haley, wife, mom, and a fertility charting instructor, here to teach you the undeniable truth about your fertility. So let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to the Truth and Fertility Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Emma Goff. We met not too long ago. We were both at a Facts About Fertility speaker training. So we were being trained to speak for this organization that teaches women and couples about fertility awareness-based methods and actually specifically teaches doctors and med students. So it was a really interesting training, and that's where we met. So we both share a love for fertility awareness-based methods, teaching women and couples about their body, about their fertility, and all of the natural things that come with that. So today, though, we have a really interesting topic that we're going to dive into, and I'm very excited to pick Emma's brain about what her experience was with this, and that's kind of what she's going to be sharing today. But we're going to be talking about purity culture, and we're going to be talking about how that kind of this pendulum swing from what I see is from the sexual revolution, right, where sex is now kind of a free-for-all and not seen as an important, maybe even sacred thing, right? It's not seen as something that's giving of yourself to another, but now it's just kind of like, yeah, this free-for-all, right? And now we've come to this other side of the pendulum where now we're in purity culture, and now we're saying that sex is bad, and now we're saying that you're dirty, and now we're saying that, without any sort of knowledge as to what sex truly is. And I don't know, Emma said that she had a story about this in her own experience, and how learning the way that her body actually worked is what helped heal her of that false understanding. So Emma, I want you to just introduce yourself, tell us all about you, your family, your business, your podcast, and then I'd love for you to just jump right into your story.
Awesome. Sounds good. I'm so excited to be here and talk with you today. Yeah, so my name is Emma Goff. My husband and I live in the Charleston, South Carolina area, and we have two kids. We have a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old. A little bit about my business side. My business is called Emma, and my hashtag or tagline is your cyclical doula. So I'm walking with people from menarche to menopause and all the motherhood in between. And so I started off actually like a little bit of my history of learning about all of this comes from I majored in religious studies in college and taught. I was a faith formation director for 7 years. And then I transitioned into being a fertility awareness instructor or a natural family planning instructor, however you want to phrase it. And I'm a certified Sympto-Pro instructor, and I also am training with the Fertility Knowledge Collective. And so both of those teach a Sympto-Thermal method of fertility awareness-based methods. So I've kind of dove into that and made this be my business and I've gotten other trainings and other things along with that. So like you were saying, Haley, I've trained to be a facts speaker and really advocating to helping doctors and med students understand what these fertility awareness-based methods are. And I also have a certification in as a miscarriage and bereavement doula that's intertwined in all of this. So that's a teeny bit about me. I grew up in New England, but my husband grew up all over, and his family is from the South Carolina area, and so we've settled here, and it's been great.
That's awesome. Yeah. And, I've never been to South Carolina. I'd love to go.
Well,
I'm
you should
sure it's
come.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Way over here on the West Coast.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But okay, that's great. Okay. So tell me then, why don't you just get started with your story about understanding or like being taught more in the lens of purity culture about sex and how learning about your body and learning body literacy and understanding
Yeah.
your fertility has actually like healed that misunderstanding that you had.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the Catholic Church. My family's pretty um was pretty involved in everything, and they still are. We still are. But so I grew up going to religious ed. I'm one of 5 kids. A bunch of them went to Catholic school. I'm the only one who actually went to public school the whole time.
Oh,
But
funny.
it was a part of our weekly daily life, right? And I think the biggest thing when talking about purity culture, it didn't come so much from like my family unit as much of just like the surrounding Catholic culture that was happening, and whether or not it was explicitly done or such, I think that's up for debate. But the concept was, or that I took away from the whole situation, my upbringing in both in my family and through a lot of these groups that I was with. I was really involved in youth ministry stuff and all of that. I was this idea that like sex is for marriage, which I still think that that's value, um, but that therefore anything outside of that or anything in regards to it is taboo, and it like isn't talked about, is sinful, and it's just like there's this repeated conversation, I think, in a lot of um, religious circles in general, not just in the Catholic community, but that there's this idea of sex is bad, like what you said, like that pendulum swing of like we're going against this culture of um you can have as much sex as you want and be as sexual of a being as you would like to be, to kind of swing to this other side of um like extreme modesty, and I think like going along with that, like there's this idea that's kind of talked about of like women need to cover their bodies so that men don't sin. And then also just that idea of when um, we're in this situation, the culture around it is that we as especially as like young people are told like that anything in regards to understanding your body is therefore on the side of like something that you should be doing after marriage. So we're not talking about um, safe practices around sex or even understanding our body in a way to deep anatomy. I know like we've talked about before, Haley and I, about like just like talking about anatomy with the correct language. And I think so often in a lot of these circles, it's just like we're going to use different names. So we're not going to talk about anatomy at all. Siblings shouldn't even know each other's anatomy, or like the opposite gender's anatomy, just because it's gonna lead down this rabbit hole of wanting to explore. And I think there can be so much harm in that. But um, I think the thing for me that really came out of all of this is, and where my story is that we have this conversation and this culture around the waiting for marriage, or um, having making sure that you're really modest and all of these things. And then the moment you get married, it switches to like, when are you having kids? Like, which is really
It's
the
a
question that
complete,
everybody asks.
yeah, it's a
Yeah, but
complete
like it's like,
180.
so
Yeah.
therefore like are you having sex? And like you should be having sex. And we don't have this time in between of like how do you even know how our bodies work appropriately, and um, when can you even get pregnant in a cycle, and all of that. And so it's not only like this emotional factor of it, but like also the physical of, unless people are actually getting the root of understanding of how anatomy works, then there's the physical aspect of it and also the emotional aspect.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for sharing that, because there's a lot of people out there in the church, outside of the church, that have had that same experience where even
Right.
though, and I do want to say too that the Catholic Church itself does not teach that sex is dirty. It
Oh
actually
yeah,
teaches that
that's
sex is
very
sacred,
important to say.
right?
Yeah.
But exactly, but the church is made up of human beings, right? And we are human
Right.
beings that fall in different
For sure.
places. And so I think that there are some people that are teaching the church teaching on sex and on family and on all everything that's encompassing in that, but they're doing it out of that reaction of that pendulum swing, right? We're
Right.
not, and I 100% agree with you in the fact that we need to be teaching women and young men. We need to be teaching young women and young men
Oh yeah.
about their bodies, so that come their wedding night, because I am 100% an advocate for waiting until you're married. We can talk about
For
that
sure.
too if you want,
Yeah.
but there is an aspect though of, okay, it's been don't have sex, don't have sex, don't have sex. Oh, now you can have sex. And it is a flip of the switch, but how can we prepare our kids? And if we're in youth ministry, how can we prepare our teens? Like, how can we teach people to be prepared for
Yeah.
that event? And I don't think that I agree with you that I don't believe that that has been set up super well in the last few decades. So yeah, so now I want you to really go into, you said that you learned, or maybe you said this off air last time, or
Yeah,
last time we
sorry.
chatted, but you said that learning about your body and the way that it worked is what helped you get to this point of understanding that
Yeah.
sex is actually good. It is a
Yeah.
good. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important to know that, like, for me in my relationship and my marriage, like my husband and I got married and we chose that we weren't, like, we wanted to avoid pregnancy for a little bit. We were
Okay.
trying to, like, we had just he had just graduated college, like we were like, we're not diving right into this, was the goal, that we were going to just have like a little bit of time to space stuff out before having a family.
Sure.
And so I, ironically, I grew up in a household that my parents used the Creighton method. I like had been tracking my bleeds ever since I had first started bleeding, and so like I knew when they were coming, and they were relatively consistent, around 30 days, right? Like it was relatively consistent. Obviously, like there's always a cycle here or there that kind of gets
Sure.
wonky,
Yes.
but I I knew when to expect it. And I had this like general knowledge of like that you can use your cycle to plan for a family. Like I had this idea, but I had never been explicitly taught the guidelines around a specific method. And so in college, before my husband and I got married, I had been like, okay, like maybe I should like actually learn a method so that when we get married, like I have this knowledge, we can use it, either to get pregnant or to avoid pregnancy. And at the time, the only way that I knew how to like find somebody who taught it was to look on the diocesan website. And I was in Vermont at the time, and there was two people's names listed with phone numbers. And I was like, me coming from this like conservative in regards to
Your family.
charting and sex in that aspect of it. Um, culture, like I was like, there's no way me as a college student's gonna call some number and be like, hey, can you teach me about sex? It's like what my brain thought, right?
Yeah.
And so
I don't think you're alone.
yeah, right. So I didn't learn then. And so when my husband and I got married, we wanted to have this time of waiting, but and so I like generally knew, like I was basically using the rhythm method, right? Like I knew generally that like there was a time of the cycle that would be better, but I didn't have any base knowledge around that, to dive really deeply into it. So we were just kind of winging it. We were we were using days that we felt like that we're fine. And we, ironically, it was like 2 years later that we got pregnant. So like, it wasn't like we were doing the rhythm method just fine. But the point being, every single cycle that that we didn't want to get pregnant, that cycle, which was a conversation, an open conversation, there was so much anxiety. And it would bring up that like purity culture shame too around that, but anxiety around like, okay, like we don't want to get pregnant, but I have no idea. And so like every time my cycle was like a little bit longer, I'd be like, wait, what? Like what's going on? Like all of that. And so it would affect the intimacy that my husband and I had because of my reaction to that. And so being able to then learn more about my body and know exactly where I was in a cycle after learning a specific method, I learned Sympto-Pro, that it gave me, along with others, I did a lot of other work too, but I think like that was a huge factor of like, now I know exactly which days are fertile and I can use those however I feel most comfortable doing so. And so that understanding of both like cyclically how my body was working, and then also doing the work to just understand the anatomy aspect of it and how all of those things worked, really just helps get out of that, the shame, the anxiety, of that upbringing that happened within purity culture, and switch into a part that like, yeah, I'm a huge advocate for knowing your body so that you can feel super confident in your relationship, in yourself, and in your daily life. Because I think it goes around all of that. And I think that it ironically, again, you were talking about like this pendulum swing. I don't think like it's not to the extreme of like what society has previously said about sex and in being super sexual, but more in the sense of like, I'm super confident in who I am as a person, and therefore like I am valuable, and I know that I'm valuable innately. I know I'm valuable by God, like through God, and like all of that aspect of it. And because I know exactly what's happening, I have all this knowledge around it. So I think that's a huge part of that aspect of like learning more about what my body's doing on a daily basis. Just it has this huge empowerment factor to it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, absolutely. I think too, just with more knowledge come about yourself, when
Yeah.
you learn about yourself, whether that's on like a personality level, or just
Yeah.
as you get
Yeah. Yeah.
older, you start to know and learn more about yourself and why you react to different things. But on a physical level, when we know more about ourselves, it does bring so much more confidence
Yeah.
to just our overall, the way that we carry ourselves. And I think too, going to that conversation around sex and knowing our body, right?
Yeah.
That means that when we do give ourselves to our husband, every time, however often that is, or however cyclical that is, we know exactly what's happening. Even on a
Right.
physiological level, that
For
brings
sure.
so much more confidence in exactly what you're saying. In and just yeah, and just knowing what's going on, knowing what the consequence, and I say consequence as a pro or con here, what,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
not just
The
con,
next
but
action.
the
Yeah.
consequence of that
Yeah.
act, right, as being unity of the spouses, but then
Right.
also possible procreation, right? And so this is the whole conversation, at least surrounding around natural family planning,
Right.
is being able to say, okay, right now we are not in a place where it would be prudent for us to have another baby. So
Right.
here's how we are going to use the way our natural body is made and how it works. We have that knowledge, that deep understanding of ourselves, so that we can then, then go from there. And I am 100% with you that I think that education needs to be happening so much earlier than
Yeah.
it currently
For
is.
sure.
And it also makes me think too of I think this actually is something that people are starting to recognize, like, okay, we
Hmm.
need a different way to be able to teach this, because the way that we've been teaching this is not helpful.
Yeah.
And so it makes me think of, I don't know, I'm totally gonna butcher her name. There's this woman that has a podcast. That doesn't narrow it down, but she has, it's called the Orgasm Class, and
Okay.
she's a practicing Catholic. She is like
Is it Ellen
everything
Holloway?
kosher. Yes, thank
Yeah,
you. Yes,
her podcast
yep.
is Charting Toward Intimacy.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
yep, that's what it is. I have not taken the course, but I've seen
Yeah.
her talk
Yeah. Yeah.
about it, or I've heard her talk about it, seen it on her podcast, and I just think that that is such amazing work, because that
Absolutely.
is the stuff that needs to be taught. Because when we
Yeah.
go into marriage knowing nothing, of course we're not going to be confident. Of course we're
Right.
not going to be, right? Like and especially too in your scenario where you're starting off marriage wanting to avoid pregnancy. Well, if you don't know anything prior to
Right.
that,
Yeah. We wung it and like it
yes.
worked out.
And it worked out, but for other people it doesn't.
Yeah,
And so
it
it's
doesn't.
just
Yeah.
like,
For
right?
sure.
Right? I think it's a funny testament to the rhythm method too,
Yeah.
because I mean, for some people it does work.
I know, and I'm like such an advocate now of like, please don't do that. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't. It was a weird string of luck, not the.
Yeah.
If you want to
Yeah.
seriously be avoiding, I don't recommend.
No, no, not at all. Not at all. For sure. Oh my goodness. Okay. So I want to dive into, if you're comfortable, if
Yeah.
you are not comfortable diving into this next question, that's perfectly fine. But I want to dive into how not understanding your body, how did that affect your relationship with your husband, especially at first? Like
Yeah.
how did that affect, I mean, I want to say your intimate life. I don't want you to share, have to
Yeah.
not
No,
feel
no, no,
like you
I
need to share more
understand.
than you want to. But just, yeah, because I do want to paint the picture of why it is so important for not just understanding your own body for family planning purposes, but also for the sake of being able to give ourselves to our spouse. Like why, how did not knowing about your body affect that? And then how did now learning more about your body and going to the point where you're now teaching other women
Yeah.
how to chart, right? How what are the, was it like night and day? Was it like what was the difference there?
Yeah. I mean, overall, my husband would probably say it was night and day. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I think like it was. I think I mentioned this, that like there was a lot of like anxiety and shame, and so like I wasn't willing to be intimate often because
Okay.
it was therefore um like if I didn't really know, then therefore I was like I don't really know if this is the right choice, and therefore like I feel like even in those times that I was like our relationship was good early on. Like we had a really good strong marriage, but I think that the for me, again, like this is a lot of personal work for me, but I feel like a
Sure.
lot of people are in this same boat early on of like or maybe later on in their relationships too, but like that knowledge of like I don't know if this is going to turn out in a different direction, and therefore like we're not ready for a baby, and therefore like maybe I just shouldn't have any sex at all because that's the safest choice, right? That's what I've been taught, right? Like if that's the only option, then that's the best choice. And so I think for a lot of it, like I wasn't always fully like involved, fully invested in any intimacy, and there's some I guess their like official title is a sex therapist, but Vanessa and Xander Marin, they're pretty popular on Instagram and they have a podcast. They're a very secular couple, so take that as you will for people who want more of a religious base of that knowledge. But they Vanessa talks about this like recoiling, um, the bristle effect is, I think it was coined by somebody else, but this idea of like when you have anxiety or like around intimacy or like you're worried about that, then it kind of affects everything. So like you like kind of recoil at the fact of like getting a hug or like getting kissed, not because you're like expecting that it's going towards sex. And so like there was all of that, and I was aware of that, like it was conscious that like that was the case. And it wasn't until I started diving into learning more about, again, like Vanessa and Xander Marin were a huge factor to that. I also, around the same time, was doing a lot of emotional intelligent work. So I found Alyssa Blast Campbell with Seed and Sow, and she does a lot of work about like teaching little tiny humans about emotional intelligence. But it was great for me because obviously like you have to do the work yourself first.
Of course. It's never too late, right?
Yeah. And so I at the same time, I was learning more about this like emotional intelligence factor, as well as like learning more about like anatomy and how that all works. And was able to really like put those together, and then also learning Sympto-Pro at the same time. And so it really switched to then being this, where intimacy now and my relationship with my husband now is a conscious effort. It's something that I like want to do. It's something that doesn't like give me that bristle effect, because of all of that knowledge around it and having that understanding of, again, like physically how it works, emotionally how that's affecting me, and then also just like where in a cycle I am, so that we know that whatever our reproductive intentions are, that cycle feels good as a couple. And I think like for me, like my husband is so supportive, and he's doing this work alongside me. He's one of 6 kids, and 5 of them are sisters. So like he like is like in like he's in the like womanhood sphere. And so he's like all about that empowerment. And so that is helpful too. I know that like not everybody's relationship is like that, and that can also have some tension as well. But he's like, yeah, like go tell everybody, like go talk about this with everybody, make sure everybody knows. So yeah, I think that's a big factor of all of that.
Yeah. So if what I'm hearing is correct, before you truly understood your body and how it worked, it affected you and your husband's intimacy to the point where you couldn't even give really your full self, or at least you were anxious around that.
Yeah, like
and
at least mentally. Yeah,
yes,
for sure. Yeah.
And because we are women, we are much more just more I think in tune with our emotions maybe.
Yeah.
and we are just much more emotional beings. Not in the sense that like all of us cry over everything, or not emotional in that way, but just we feel things differently. And when we are feeling something, that affects the way that we respond to to things outside of us. And so I've never actually heard of it called the bristle effect. That's so interesting, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
To where even if a hug that's not leading to sex, right, that even causes us this recoil, right? Or this kind of like this antsy feeling of, I don't even know. It's hard to put words to it.
It is hard to explain, but I think like for somebody who hasn't heard about it before, and therefore like I think it's helpful to explain it, because I think a lot of people experience it of like, you're it's kind of just the like ants crawling on your body feeling of like I don't want anything else to happen. You kind of like want to pull away. But this, it's the idea of just like, it feels yucky is really like a lot of people experience like that, like gut reaction of it just like feels off, and you like therefore like don't want to be touched, and like you're loading the dishwasher and your husband comes up from behind you to like give you a hug just to say hi because he came home from work, and you're just like, no, like this is not the right thing. Which obviously like I think that there's a time and a place that's like helpful and important that our body reacts that way, but when it's because of not knowing what's coming next or not feeling good about previous intimacy and all of that, then that's where it can be hard.
Yeah, for sure. And that is, it's giving us this sense of sex that's actually completely opposite as to what it actually is, right?
For sure.
Because if it actually is between a husband and a wife, a self-giving, like you are giving of your whole self, that is the most vulnerable thing that you could ever do with another human being. And when our brains are then trained to think of it as yucky, right, or dirty or shameful, or put whatever word you want to it, right, that, and even especially if that's how we were taught growing up, that leaves a really lasting impact on then your future intimacy with your spouse and what that act is actually looking like. And I mean, we're both wives and mothers, but I can't even imagine, right, on the side of the husbands and the fathers who are experiencing this too, because, and I only know this because I have a husband who's told
You're
me
right.
that it makes the men feel not wanted and not
Absolutely.
appreciated
Yeah.
and not and so it's damaging on both ends,
Oh,
right?
for
And I think
sure.
this can be the breakdown of what sex is actually supposed to be. And so, yeah, if anything, if we start anywhere, it is teaching young people at age appropriate times, right? Of course, teaching young people about their bodies and about what this actually is, what sex is meant to be, and the language that it's speaking to your spouse. And we, for our listeners, Emma and I are kind of doing a podcast swap here. So
Yeah.
I was just on her podcast and now she's on mine. So I'll link I'll put the link in the show notes for our podcast on her Cyclical Doula podcast. But one thing we talked about over there was using correct language of anatomy when we're teaching our young kids. And so the example I used was, my son who's 5 years old. I learned, he's my oldest, and I learned very quickly that this conversation is not meant for like older kids. Like it starts now.
Probably before you even think.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Because they're learning about themselves, they're learning about their bodies. And so how do we then respond to those questions that they have? And I have I was talking to a good friend of mine who's about 10 years older than me, 10 years more experience than I am in all of this. And I was asking her, how do I handle when my son, and now my 3-year-old daughter's starting to ask, what those things are, like, how do I handle that? And one thing she said to me that really stuck with me, and I think this is going to be something that really lays the foundation for how I speak to my kids about this moving forward as they get older and the conversation gets deeper, is she said, any feeling of like yuckiness, like to use your words, or any feeling of like this is taboo, or any feeling of dirtiness, or any feeling of like, oh man, this is a conversation, it's coming from you. It's not coming from them. And so when we speak to them about, okay, for teaching my son, like, that's your penis. That's not your hoo-ha. That's not your wiggly thing. No, like that's your penis. This is your vagina. Like, and teaching it to them as if you were saying, yeah, that's your arm. And obviously these body parts, I feel they contain more weight than an arm does.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because they have the potential to make new human life, which an arm does not. But in that conversation though, I think if we use weird words for it, or we act kind of weird around it, that portrays this image of, oh, this is weird. Oh, this question is odd. Or, oh, this is something that's even getting to the point of dirty or shameful, right? And so that really struck with me, that any feeling that we have when we're talking to our little kids about it, that's coming from us. And so I'm like, okay, how do I not kind of spread that to my kids? It's so hard. But going back to this idea of having the conversation young, of course, age appropriate topics and answering their questions, maybe not
I think that's
something, but answering the questions as they come. I know I've been talking for a while. If you have any thoughts on that.
No, that's great. I 100% agree with you. I think the huge thing, you just said it, but I think like answering their questions the way that they ask their question. I have a really good example. Like my kids are 5 and 4, and so we talk about the anatomy correctly all the time. There has been conversations that they've said like, where do like how are babies, whatever, right? And so like we've had the conversation of like, a baby grows in a uterus. Some people call it a womb. Some people say that the baby grows in their tummy, but it's like really in your uterus, right? And so we were driving to dance last week, and my 5-year-old was like, well, like, how do babies come out? And I was like, this is a good question, right? Like, how do babies come out? And I was like, well, there's a couple of ways that babies can come out. Like, babies come out through either what some people call it the birth canal, but it's really your vagina, or some people have C-sections, cesarean sections, where it like comes out through surgery. And I stopped there because that's what they were asking. They were asking like, where does the baby come out? That's all they were asking. They then asked a follow-up question. They were like, and I realized that I didn't ask the correct question to answer before I answered. Because I thought in my mind, babies come out, right? C-section, vagina. They were like, no, but like where? And I was like, oh, like some people give birth at the hospital or at home or like at birth centers. And they were like, okay. And I was like, shoot, I like
clarifying questions.
My own clarifying questions that I'm usually so good about. Like, tell me a little bit more. Cause like, he was like, no, like, where do babies come? Like, where? And I was like, oh, right. Like,
shoot.
And so like, if I had gone on this like whole tangent about like, this is how birth works, like he would have been like, what is mom talking about? Which like he might have also had that question in context, but it was one of those things where I was like, oh man, like I'm usually so good about, again, like trying to like get over the fact of like any of my feelings around this, like they're just asking a question, they just want to know more. Same with when they asked me the other week, my daughter asked me, they were like, she said, they were both together, she was like, why, she's like, do birds pee? And I was like, honestly, I have no idea. Like, let's look it up. But right, it's like the same, like kids have these questions all the time. They're thinking through how stuff works.
Natural curiosity.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, it was one of those things where I was like, oh man, the clarifying question to like ask, like, what do you mean when you're asking this? So I think like in regards to that, and when people are having these conversations with their kids around sex and intimacy, like sometimes like there's gonna be a time where a kid asks a question of like, well, how are babies made? And like for that kid at that particular age, the answer might be good enough of babies are made with an egg and a sperm, right? Like that might be enough. And I think like that's helpful to know that like when a kid, especially a little kid, asks a question like that, we don't need to go into a whole science lesson and pull out all of our amazing resources that are out there. But like sometimes it's just a like quick answer of like, yeah, babies are born in hospitals or at home or like wherever a family feels comfortable.
Yeah, that is so good. And I'm actually so grateful that you shared the answer that you did give, even though that wasn't necessarily what he's asking, because my son, this was probably maybe 2 years ago now. So he was 3. We had visited a friend of mine who just had a baby.
Right.
And so on our way home, and my son also, I mean, all kids I think are pretty curious, but my son, oh my word, this kid is going to be a scientist one day because he's so overly curious about everything. And he said, on the way home, he was like, how did that baby come out of her tummy? And so I was like, okay, how do I remember looking at my husband and I'm like, where do we go from here? And I ended up saying something to the extent of, well, she had the baby in her tummy, and then when it was time, when the baby was big enough, the baby came out, and now it's in her arms. And I was like, please be enough, please be enough, please be enough.
Right.
And then he goes, well, yeah, okay, but how? And I looked at my husband, and again, he's 3. So like we're barely hitting on male anatomy, barely, right? And so I'm like, we're not going here. So I ended up, this is the first time I ever used this, and I wanted to see if it even worked. And I was like, well, you know what, bud, that's a question that I'm going to answer when you're a little bit older. And I was kind of like holding my breath, and he was like, oh, okay. And then he just went on. Yeah. And sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. But I do think that's also a testament to, okay, sometimes there are questions that, and it's totally up to you as a parent, knowing your kid well enough, knowing what you've taught them already. Do they have a foundation to know? Because like my son didn't know what a vagina was. So if I would have said he comes out of the vaginal canal, like, no. There
like
would have been plenty more.
Hold on.
Yes. Yeah. So I do think, like, obviously age, of course, this whole thing is laced over with age appropriate conversations, but it is true, just getting back down to the purpose of using correct language and just answering it as it comes, and not exactly what you said, not going into a tangent about, all the, because that's not what they're asking for. They're not
Right, they
asking,
weren't
they're asking.
asking the mechanics of sex. They were asking about,
Right.
and like
Thank
now that,
God.
right now, but now that I'm like, now that we're talking about this too, I was like, ooh, like if they had asked more questions about like birth, I could have been like, well, like the female like body like has contractions and the muscles like help push the baby out, right? Like I'm like, that, like, this is all science. Like it doesn't
Right.
need to be like, it's really cool science too. Like it just, like, it doesn't need to be anything more. And I think that that's where, like, going back to this, the other part of the conversation, like sometimes we just need to know the truth behind like how things really work, and therefore we can then make choices that feel comfortable to us, regardless of like with our morals or like all of that. And I think like that comes into parenting, about like how do you teach kids your morals around all of that, but um that we can still have those, like you can still tell this the correct mechanics of sex and all of these things at whatever age feels appropriate for you and your family, while also still like putting the morals in there, so you can have those conversations around like, okay, like this is how it actually works, and also our family believes X, Y, and Z. And
Yeah.
I think that that can be really powerful for kids, and therefore young women and men, to be able to know like, okay, like I learned this information, this is what my parents morals and values were around this, and then I can make these choices about like what these are my values around that. Because I think when we don't have the knowledge base in regards to any of this, like how do we even make a moral value decision? Because we just are told like this is what your moral is supposed to be, and if we don't have the like understanding of how that is, it makes it really hard.
Yes. Yeah. And I also 100% believe that faith needs to be hand in hand with reason.
Yeah,
So we shouldn't just believe something for no good reason, right? It is completely 100% intertwined with the science of how our bodies are made.
right,
And then we can build on the morals from there. And oftentimes too, it makes the conversation a whole lot more cohesive, rather
right,
than just having like the sex talk. You sit down, blah, 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 like, explain everything, and then that's it. There's no other conversation around it, right?
yeah,
I think it needs to start early with
yeah,
just anatomy, as they're asking the questions, and
right,
answering concisely, but answering correctly at an age appropriate level. And then that leading so beautifully really into that further conversation down the road, when they're old enough to understand, okay, what actually is sex, and then what is the context of sex, like what is the
right,
language of sex, right?
right.
That conversation comes so much more easily, I think. And of course, I say this with my oldest being 5, so I have
Right.
not yet been there
Right.
as a
Yep.
mother, but I also worked in youth ministry for a little while, like you
Yeah.
did, and I've been around that I don't want to say culture, but I've been around that space where people are wondering, like, why is this dirty? Is it shameful? Is it, and they don't have that foundational knowledge of what it even is, to then understand how sex is a gift, right? How it
Yeah.
is a language of the body, where you
Right.
are giving your whole self. And then when you don't have that foundation, when you don't have that understanding of your body, of your husband's body, like on an anatomical level, even if you don't have that understanding, then that breeds in a whole lot of anxiety and a whole lot of stress and a whole lot of,
Right.
maybe to the point of shame, as we were saying earlier, to where now you're saying, okay, sex is dirty. That could even lead into my body is dirty, and
Right. 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 For
that
sure.
just breaks
Yeah.
everything else down, right?
Right.
So yeah, this needs to be a conversation that starts early.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. This has been such an amazing conversation, Emma. I really, really enjoyed this conversation,
That's
and
so
I really
awesome.
hope our listeners get a lot of fruit from it. Emma, before we end our time, if there's anything else you wanted to touch on, or also to tell our listeners where they could find you.
Yeah, awesome. I think the biggest thing that I'll just end with is just to for your listeners, I'm assuming most of them are like into relationships, a little bit older, maybe closer in age to us,
Sure.
but maybe not. Maybe it's a whole range of people. But I
I
think
think
like,
it's
yeah,
all around the
okay,
same
yeah,
ages. Yeah.
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 So I think
The
like
20s and
I
30s.
think if you're listening to this and thinking like, oh my, like I'm still there, like I'm still in that situation where like I don't feel like I've crossed to this other line, or like I don't feel like I have the tools to like teach my kids about this. um there's a lot of great resources out there, but I think like the biggest thing is just like to start with yourself and to figure out like where those like icky feelings come up for yourself, and work on like getting that knowledge base around that first, and then work from there. And it's never too late to learn it for yourself, and it's never too late to change the conversation with your kids. Even if your kids are past and you've been using different language, you can sit down as a family and say, hey, we learned something new as parents, and we're going to change the way that our family is talking about this. And like that's okay. Like that's actually really good. Like it's good for our kids to see like sometimes we learn new information and that changes the way that we act about certain situations. So that's just how I'll leave it with that. But people can find me on Instagram and Facebook. My handle's Cyclical Doula. My podcast is the Cyclical Doula podcast. And then my website is emma.com. So EMMAMMA.com. And people are welcome to find me at any of those places.
Great. And I'll put all of those links in the show notes below. Thank you so much, Emma. This is such a good conversation. Thanks for being on.
Absolutely. It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Truth and Fertility podcast. If you are enjoying this content, please leave a 5-star review. That helps me tremendously. For more information about learning to chart your fertility cycle, you can visit truthandfertility.com, and I'll talk to you guys again next week.